En Zoom Bilbao no hay descanso para la innovación.
At Zoom Bilbao, there is no break for innovation. I will be debating on one of the main topics at this conference, which is funding and public-private partnerships as a driver for sustainable mobility. And we will have this both in English and Spanish. We ask you to take a seat while we receive the presenters, the panelists on stage. We welcome Pere Calvet, President of the UITB, International Association of Public Transportation. Welcome. We will also have Florinda Boschetti, Director of the City Club, IIT Urban Mobility. Welcome to the stage. This is an institute of the European Union. This is an innovation center on mobility. We also call to the stage Judith Ujinja. She is a researcher by ONU Habitat. Welcome to the stage. And to the moderator would be Borja Moreno, Director General at Ibérica, General Manager at Ibérica.
Borja, I give you the floor. Enjoy the discussion.
Hello? Yeah, can you hear me? Yeah? It's okay, the sound? Sí. Buenas tardes, gracias a los ponentes.
Well, good afternoon. I'd like to thank the presenters, the panel members, the organizers, and the organization of Business for Sustainable Mobility to give us the opportunity to share our knowledge today here, and also the audience for being here today with us, because without you, this change would not be possible. It is an honor to be here today because my grandmother was born here in Bilbao. She was a Sanjurjo. I will now introduce the presenter.
Sustainable mobility expert and researcher, Solutions Plus UN Habitat. Judith is an urban planner and mobility expert with a passion for cities, the environment, decreasing poverty, gender, and youth issues. Her work experience is with international organizations, including the United Nations and the private sector, specializing in project management, research, sustainable transport planning, and community mobilization. She currently works for UN Habitat in the Solution Plus project, focusing on promoting electric mobility transition, investments, and in partnership in developing contexts. She's based at the Blekinge Institute in Technology in Sweden. And you are from?
Kenya.
So yeah, it's amazing what you are involved. Could you please, give us a little bit more background?
Thank you. So currently I am, can you hear me? Good. Currently I am working on the Solutions Plus project, which is an EU-funded project by Horizon Funds. It seeks to seek out partnerships between European experts and experts from developing contexts. So we have this north to south, south to north transfer of knowledge and experience, which is very important and very much in line with the topic for today's panel. Thank you.
Yes, beautiful. I'm going to present Pere Calvet. Pere Calvet es un ingeniero de caminos, canales y puertos por la Universidad.
He's a civil engineer by the University of Catalonia. He's Director General of Railroads at the Government of Catalonia since 2011 and President of the International Union for Public Transportation. He used to be Director General for Railroads in Catalonia, and before he worked mainly at FGC. He works also with international and national bodies related with transportation and mobility. Now he's the president of the Congress of Smart Mobility at Barcelona, and he's a board member of the ATUC, the Association of Urban and Collective Transportations. also to the Metropolitan Transportation Commission of Barcelona, and also the Infrastructure Management Association of the Civil Engineers Association. He has received several awards for civil engineers, like the award Ile-de-France, which is the main distinction, the highest distinction of the Civil Engineer Association of Catalonia. So he's quite an authority. So please tell us a little bit more about you. Well, thanks, Borja, for this introduction. And that has been very kind, although a little bit too long. And I'm quite happy to be here again in Bilbao 2 years ago. I was together with the mayor of Bilbao, the mayor of Strasbourg, and we signed together the Declaration of Bilbao, which is a clear declaration of intentions. And I'm happy because it has been able to overcome the passing of time. Sometimes a declaration like this is lost with time. This one has resisted time and has resisted COVID. So I'd like to thank the organizers for being able to keep this declaration alive. Well, very interesting. Thanks, Pere. I don't know if you can hear me all right, because, Pere, I cannot hear you properly.
I don't hear you, I don't hear the speakers. I wonder if maybe I need a headset. Sorry for the interruption.
So Florinda Boschetti holds the at AIT Urban Mobility KIC, where she animates the community of city and region governments and living labs. Florinda is an urban planner graduated from the Polytechnic of Milan in 2001, and transport planner, doctor, University of Brescia, 2009, and is an enthusiastic advocate of livable and healthy cities. She has 20 years experience working in sustainable mobility and urban governance across academia, the public sector in Italy, and European Networks Association, and liaising with the public official, national and international stakeholders, European institutions, the governance organizations. Well, she has led so much significant work. Florinda, it's a pleasure to have you here. I give you the word.
Borja, thank you for the invitation. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm pleased to be here after having organized myself a conference, the European Conference on Sustainable Urban Mobility 3 years ago in Groningen. It's great to be here, the Bilbao edition. As Borja said, I have joined the AT Urban Mobility just after its launch, and I'm coordinating and animating the community of practice of public governments engaged in this partnership, in this initiative. So thank you again. I'm really delighted to see people face to face today. Thank you again.
Okay, so let's go for the first. Let's talk about what are the biggest challenges related to public-private partnership and sustainable mobility. I would like maybe you can start.
Well, it's always interesting to be the first one to start, because I hope I can cover all the points and leave some for you. Yes, but one of the main challenges of establishing public-private partnerships is actually identification of stakeholders. So we have traditional stakeholders who are often the private companies and the public authorities, and this is a given, and it has been in practice for several years. But now, as we look at sustainable mobility and as we transition into sustainable mobility, we realize that we are having new stakeholders entering the scene. For example, we have a lot of startup companies, for instance. When we talk about electric mobility, we have new technology companies that are operating within the field of electric mobility. So we have new stakeholders who are coming in, and it is important to make sure that we do not forget key stakeholders when we're looking into public and private partnerships. A second challenge that comes after identifying the stakeholders is how do we match the expectations? So we have the mandate of the public authorities, which is to deliver public service. And then we have the mandate or the interest of private companies, which is to make profit. So how do we match the expectations when it comes to public-private partnerships? How do we ensure that public authorities are still able to achieve their mandate of public service while private companies are still able to maximize on their profits? So this, again, is a balancing act that becomes a challenge or an opportunity depending on how you mitigate the situation. And thirdly, it is very important, even as we talk about public-private partnerships, to include the civil society. Why do we need the civil society? Because there are cross-cutting issues that have to be taken care of. When we talk about issues of accessibility, when we talk about issues of gender, we need to bring in the civil society in public-private partnerships to make sure that we do not forget the cross-cutting issues. I think I will hand over to my panel members.
Yeah, great. Thank you. It was very inspiring and very kind words. Maybe Florinda, do you want to go ahead? Or Pere, I don't know.
Yeah, I hope you can hear me. I agree with what Judith said, stakeholders engagement, bringing in the civil society. Keeping the stakeholders together and the initiator of the partnership is fundamental. But when I look from the city perspective, we see the role of cities is changing. From traditional managers of mobility services, they are becoming more of an orchestrator of different and new type of providers and suppliers. This changing role is not a natural change. There's a need to understand how their role is changing in becoming an orchestrator, bringing together local ecosystem, these stakeholders, and being the interface to the citizens. We keep talking about user-centric solutions. Cities, local authorities, the local government are the first player where the citizens turn to, even before the national government. So listening to the citizens go through the cities who are looking at how their role is changing in this partnership. They're managing different type of suppliers, they're managing different type of contracts. So I think there are a couple of key questions on these public and private partnerships. I have noted down a few. Absolutely, what is important, and I think Judith you mentioned, is to pull together resources, capability, because it's only together that the major goals and targets for sustainability can be achieved. But how to develop partnership is one key question. What are the different models that exist? Here we are representing some partnership at European or international level, but many of you are maybe involved in partnership at the local level with new type of solution providers and operators. But also how these models can adapt to disruption in mobility and also the new technologies. And the fourth point is how can the expertise and the resources be optimized in this partnership. Multiple examples exist across Europe, in regions and cities, and maybe some of these examples will just pop up during the conversation.
Great. No, it's the cooperation public-private. It's essential. We just need to make good plans and align, and everything will evolve in a good way. Yeah. Pere, what would you like to add?
Oh, es evidente que la colaboración público-privada, como han comentado.
Well, it is clear that public-private partnerships is essential because we can leverage the potential of both parts. But just to say something different, I have to say that in public-private partnerships, it is necessary to agree before starting about the goals, technical goals, financial goals, and also where will we get the money for the businesses. If this is not clear from the beginning, then we won't succeed. We have seen examples of very good PPPs in Spain. I could give examples, for example, in Barcelona, like the tramways of Barcelona, which is a very successful PPP. And although this is not very well known, and which is the contribution of PPPs in the building of the Line 9 of Metro Barcelona, which is a 50-kilometer metro line with automated trains that where the stations were built by the private sector and the tunnels were built by the public sector. So this could be very good, a very good result for the private sector. There are also some things that were not successful, like the high-speed train tunnel of the Pyrenees that started as a PPP and had to be bailed out by two countries, Spain and France. So it is very important to know where the resources, the financial resources, are going to be coming from.
Es muy interesante.
Really, it's very interesting. This is a very interesting reflection. And of course, from your point of view and with the knowledge you've got from all this part, we are going to talk right now about intermodality posers, important challenges in terms of matching infrastructure.
Services, how to approach the new in transportation planning. Can it be done without the private sector? Judith, what do you think? Can it be done?
So we have this discussion on intermodality, which is the ability to move from one mode to the other in a seamless fashion. This is very important for the current dynamic cities that we have, whereby users need to be able to move from one mode to the other transport mode in the easiest way possible. And it all begins with planning. So as an urban planner myself, I say it begins and ends with planning. We have to look at the current situation. How are people traveling and moving within our cities? And how do we envision them to move in, looking into the future? And then we have to do a backcasting and come back and say, if we have a present situation X, let's say we want to introduce scooters into the city. So how then are we able, what exactly is needed for this? The first thing that we need to do is to provide the infrastructure needed for the modal transport. So if we want to do modal transfers, then we have to make sure that we have integrated infrastructure that starts, so at the end of a particular journey needs to be the beginning of the next journey. And this is very important on how we design and provide the infrastructure for this. And then we also have to go towards user awareness. We have to make it easy. That's the point of intermodality. We have to get user buying into the new projects, into the modality combinations. And how do we do that? We do that through user awareness. We have to show people how easy and how possible it is to do this. And another very key part of making it easier for users to integrate into intermodal processes is to have integrated ticketing. For example, this summer I had a summer holiday in Venice, and it was very interesting that I could buy a ticket and be able to use the water bus and use the same ticket to use the bus system as well. This was easy, so I didn't have to buy multiple tickets for the different modes within the city. This is very important, that we need to have integrated ticketing within our cities so that we make life easier for the user. When you plan for intermodality, have the user in mind. Start with planning, have the user in mind, and think about user awareness.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Judith. Very interesting input, more coming from all this experience. Yeah, it's difficult because I cannot, sometimes I don't hear you. No.
The headset, Ter and myself. Can we have a headset on stage, please?
Yeah. Perdón. Yeah. Es que no, ¿sabes qué pasa? Que
You know what it happens? We cannot listen to one another properly, but I don't know whether we can solve this.
no.
It's very difficult to hear you, but
Yeah,
I could grasp a few words what Judith said.
Yeah, that's the point. It's difficult to understand each other's. I don't know on the public.
Because we hear the echo from the speakers in the session.
It's the same.
It's a lot of echo, okay. I don't know if it's the mask, but... Now, I wanted to build on what I've heard that Judith mentioned on the infrastructure is necessary to have the services working. That's not just applying for mass mobility as a service technology type of services. And I'm thinking about some examples on how cities are leveraging data and data sharing. Not just the standards on how data is collected, how data is shared, with the private operators, but how data can help manage and operate the service, but also improve the infrastructure on which the service will eventually run. And when speaking about data sharing, and again, the challenges within partnership on data sharing, again, there are a couple of questions that I have in my mind. There are some gaps between the way operators and public authorities use data, which is still there and yet is looking for solutions. There's a need to collaborate on the interoperability. Absolutely what Judith says is relevant, and also on service delivery eventually, and data can help to understand. GDPR compliance. GDPR compliance in Europe is not following the same rules as in the United States. We are in Europe developing multimodal digital mobility services standards. I saw the Commission has just launched yesterday a public consultation on multimodal digital mobility services. So it's interesting also for any organization here and the general public to have a say on how these services could be organized. So infrastructure, services, data. The responsibility as well. Infrastructure, services, responsibility on data collection, who is accountable for the collection and the procession of the data. Technical expertise within those managing the data, which eventually will help improve infrastructure and the services, and the capacity gap. So I think within the partnership, one intrinsic element is looking at upskilling the professional, the experts working in implementing new mobility solutions, not just managing the current system that we know how it works, but looking at the upcoming and new trends coming from Asia, also coming from the US, and developing themselves as well in Europe. There's a strong capacity for developing innovation in Europe. There's entrepreneurial capacity, but we need to train and upskill practitioners and professionals that need to understand how to handle new type of infrastructure, new type of services, and mass mobility as a service is one of those new services where I think not all the professionals have the necessary knowledge about the technology. I think this can complement well what you have said. Maybe Pere wants to add on this from your experience.
Yeah, great complementation. Yeah, Pere, algunas ciudades están estableciendo.
The cities there are some cities that are setting up sandbox and experimentation areas, which is the future of these initiatives and which can be lessons that we can learn from them. So the truth is, those are initiatives that have been taken in many cities all over the world. This is something very interesting because they report experiences of what is happening, and they give a pedagogical lesson to the citizens so that they can raise their awareness in this new way of working. So it is something very positive in this sense. And we have to be careful anyway, because the citizen can understand that this is being made because the administration doesn't know what they want, and they are making tests and trials. So I think that this is a topic we have to be very cautious about so that we can have a good, positive and progressive result. And we shouldn't be working just with this trial and error process. But there's another aspect which is fundamental that we should take into consideration too. And it is that sustainable mobility does not only take place with these actions. Those are small actions and at a low cost, usually. For this sustainable mobility, governments, town halls must invest a huge amount of money in order to taking out the vehicles of the cities, and we won't reach this just with that. And I could give you an example of a reality next to us, the reality I know in Barcelona. In Barcelona, 1 million vehicles come into every day. So there is a movement of 1 million. Our company, the railway of the Generalitat, move 350,000 travelers per day. So if we could could reduce this to a third, if we could reduce the pollution coming from these vehicles in a third, we should have a company like ours just to reduce 1/3. I want to say with this, the sandbox are very interesting. We have to experiment within the cities with them, but we have to be brave and courageous and to invest huge amounts of money in order to reduce the parts that are really polluting, which are the entry and the exit in the city of the commuters. So these experiences are really very interesting. They are very delicate, but at the political level, the cost is very low. You can implement them very quickly, so we are thankful for them. Florinda.
To the comments of Pere.
Did I grasp it well? It's about the sandboxes regulation in the city. Yeah, if it's something that I have experienced myself and that I have learned while working some 10 years with city networks at EU level, at the local level, is that cities need to try out from themselves new services, new solutions, test them, validate them, adapt them, shape a suitable legislative framework and regulation that fits their needs. And they have the right to fail. There's nothing bad in failing. You try, you trial, you may fail, but you have certainly learned something. And if I bring to you one concrete example from very recent and maybe common to many cities, the arrival of the free-floating bicycles and the electric scooters. I don't know how the situation is in Bilbao, but in many other European capital cities or medium-sized cities, they have suddenly arrived one night on the streets with any prior dialogue with the city council. Yeah, it was a new solution, yes. Users arrived, there was good success, and after a month, they were gone. Big deception among the users, maybe company has bankrupt and the city is left with unhappy citizens, misconception of a service which was promising to bring us more sustainable mobility, and in fact has simply ruined the maybe over 20 years work that cities have been doing to promote cycling. This is just an example, I could make many more. So the lessons learned. Cities are welcoming innovation. They are leaders of innovation. I think we shall trust them more as players having a leading role. But dialogue is fundamental between the private sector and the public sector. Establishing a contact, having a dialogue, work out together what are the needs, not just bring a new challenge. Think about the electric scooters, they are dumping payments, they are just thrown in the rivers, in the canals. These are new problems. So the dialogue needs to be established in the first place. This is how some cities are putting in place test regulation. Paris, with the arrival of the electric scooters some 3-4 years ago, has tried a memorandum of understanding, a code of conduct before introducing regulation. So yes, this is necessary, especially in times of new mobility services, new solutions that we don't know how they will look like in the future. Flying boards, the monowheel, maybe will become mainstream, but the dialogue is important to anticipate also bad behaviors, negative impact. So let cities innovate, try, fail, but work together with the private sector to improve mobility and achieve together the same goal, not just bring new challenges that cities have to solve.
Yeah, yeah, go ahead.
Can you hear me? Okay, good. Just to agree with both of you, it is very important that we have testing within our cities because that is how innovation works. If we do not create testing and innovations and living labs are not options because sometimes they're presented as if we have the main project and then we have the test as an option or as an extra activity that we have in our cities. But they are actually part and parcel of the innovative action of cities because cities are where ideas are created. So the environment to be able to test is part and parcel of the process of development and of the process of innovation. We do need to enable innovators within the society to feel that they are a necessary stakeholder within the city and that they have the right environment and the right platform to test their new technologies and their new ideas. And as Florinda has also said, one of the ways, by being able to identify possible bad behaviors or possible risks with a particular technology, would it be better to test the technology before investing huge amounts of money in large-scale projects? It is better to first of all test it in a smaller scale in order to be able to envision and imagine what it would possibly look like once it is rolled out at a large-scale setting.
Yeah, it's so motivating, all of this that is happening, and all these challenges, all these inventors. It's it's really fun, indeed. What about electric mobility? We all know that e-mobility is suffering an exponential growth. The e-mobility is not the future, it's the present, indeed. Is electrification sufficient to guarantee sustainable mobility? Do we also have to intervene in the upstream of the energy supply? Judith, for example, what do you think about this?
All right, so when we talk about electric mobility, we need to ask ourselves, why electric mobility in the first place? What has led us towards electric mobility? We have two reasons for electric mobility. The first being air pollution. Air pollution is an increasing crisis on the globe, on the planet. And with air pollution, especially in our cities, we realize that the largest emissions within cities is coming from the transport sector. And this is the first reason why we want to move towards electric mobility. And the second reason is we want to capitalize on energy sources. What are the potentials for renewable energy or for converting the current fossil fuel vehicle fleet to an electric fleet, thereby creating opportunities for renewable energy? What are the opportunities in this? And now this ties into your question, do we need to change the energy upstream? Yes, absolutely. Because the electric vehicle in itself is not a full sustainability solution. We have to have the source being sustainable as well, being powered by renewable and clean energy for an electric transport system to be considered fully sustainable. Without this, we are still missing the point. So it is very important for us to look in our cities and in our countries, what is the energy mix? So are we looking at sources from geothermal sources, solar, wind, hydroelectric, and other sources of renewable energy? Are we powering our e-mobility through this? And secondly, we also have to implement electric mobility within the context of sustainable urban mobility planning. So if we have a city that has a problem with private cars, fossil fuel private cars, and we electrify all the cars in this state, we still have congested cities, only clean congestion, basically. So we need to then promote, even as we implement electric mobility, we need to make sure that we are promoting other sustainable modes of travel, public transport, walking and cycling, planning compact cities. So these are some of the points that we need to look at when we talk about electric mobility. It is not a solution in itself, but it has to be taken in tandem with other sustainable mobility solutions and strategies.
Yeah, great. It's e-mobility is unstoppable. Yeah, I'm totally agree with your comments. Okay, so let's talk about another topic. Let's change a little bit. Están proliferando numerosos modelos de
Many models of business are growing in our cities, such as shared electrical mobility, digitalization of services of transport, logistics of the last mile. Can all of them live together? Can there be a coexistence? How are we going to regulate all this micro-mobility, all these ways, for instance, Pere? The truth is that they can live together, they can coexist, and this is proven in many cities. The initiative, the private initiative of detects some needs and offers them in the market. And it has detected that the society, or a part of the society at least, needed these electrical scooters, and they have turned up, they have appeared. Or some time ago, we saw these bicycles in the cities, and with these photographs of Chinese cities where we could see mountains of bicycles. making more or less, well, a mountain. They are making up a mountain, and they had been left behind because the initial manufacturer price was so low. And just after a couple of spinnings, they really had a benefit of the investment. So in cities such as Los Angeles some years ago, you could find scooters that were thrown away, bicycles, but also with Uber in cities without regulation. This works too. But anyway, in a closer view of the management of the public spaces, probably will need a certain regulation that can put some order in these European cities, in the space of the European cities, and then we'll have to share it among all the needs. And if this regulation wouldn't exist, it could be very difficult to live together. In any case, we also need one step forward on behalf of the administration so that this regulation can be made very quickly. And we have got many difficulties here to follow the pace. And I think that the administration should either deregulate or should regulate or establish the order. For instance, these hubs of mobility where bicycles, scooters, and even electrical cars would be in the same point, and we wouldn't find this lack of order. And this wouldn't bind to have a regulation about how to drive a scooter or whatever. It would be much easier to implement. Of course, private initiatives will keep on turning up every time there is a business opportunity, either in the long run, in the long haul, or in the midterm. This is more difficult, maybe. Perhaps these businesses are not thinking in the long haul, but they will appear. That's obvious. Okay.
I like what Pere said, and I like the question, can all these modes exist? They are already coexisting. It's a bit chaotic sometimes. In other occasions, the coexistence is more peaceful. But it's also about prioritizing. Regulation can help to prioritize. Policies are needed. Strong political commitment are needed to prioritize certain modes. And it's not about just kicking cars out of the city. We will have cars. Some of the speakers this morning mentioned it. It's not about cars away, all the other modes welcome. It's about the right mode for the right trip. All modes are important in a different way, for a different scope, for a different purpose, for a different time of the day, for a different type of households. So how all these new mobility services can integrate the existing offer, how all together can coexist in cities which we are trying not to expand with continuous sprawling in the metropolitan area in the region, keeping cities compact, keeping density the leading element which enables higher ridership on public transport or incentivizing walking, cycling to take the extra affluence to public transport during peak hours, how maybe autonomous vehicles may come and help. There are many use cases on autonomous vehicles. We don't know how this will deploy, when it's true that we said some cities are testing these solutions, but the infrastructure needs to be in place before the services can come. And then yet again, what is the legislative framework for having autonomous vehicles? So there are some sandboxes, yes, they are testing solutions which could hit our streets very soon. Maybe not next year, the technology is available. We were saying with Pere yesterday, technology is available, regulation not yet for autonomous vehicles. But coexistence of all these modes, I think, is key, and integration is the challenge. Through mobility as a service, through access to multimodal travel planners for the user. And yet again, we come back to data sharing. Who holds the data? Who uses the data? So it's a fascinating discussion. I don't have all the answers, but absolutely, I think that we need to have holistic approaches. And what we have seen about Bilbao having a holistic approach from urban planning, transport planning, new mobility services, putting people at the center of planning and harmonizing different plans and strategies is key to achieve these goals that cities are posing on themselves, European Commission is posing on cities, and we have the global emergency, the global climate emergency, which is above us all. And this is the decade for action, so we cannot delay the action to the next decade. There's no time.
Yeah. It's interesting because we can also add here the IoT, Internet of Things is going to have a very interesting point in this ecosystem, because everything is interconnected. Also, I would add the blockchain technology. Blockchain is bringing a decentralized way of doing things, and this will add a lot of value on the urban ecosystem and in the mobility ecosystem, because blockchain will bring us security, it will bring decentralized solutions, it will bring like logistic improvements, like to be able to localize and interact with millions of transactions in a very with much easier than with the actual systems that we have today, nowadays. So yeah, I think it's interesting. Thanks for the inputs. Con respecto al programa de Next Generation.
Regarding the program of Next Generation, that has been has a funding of 1,700 million. This, which is focusing on railroads and sustainable mobility. Do we need this investment effort? What other things could we do? Just to give you some, what I want is some context. Do you think 1,600 million is too many, or what? So, for example, in 6 capital cities in Spain, we could have like 16 kilometers of metro, or an electric bus, like the ones we can see here. We could have like, the cost is like 600,000 euro per bus. So that will be like 11,000 buses. So I think that's a lot of money. That's a very high volume of money that we should know how to use, because this is just the initial investment. This initial investment that should drive subsequent investment. This is not enough, but it should be the first step to accelerate all these processes. This accelerating of these processes, we will need in Spain 2 aspects. One is a mobility regulation to fund all this, without a mobility law that guarantees companies and city halls that there will be money arriving year after year. It will be very hard to continue with this. And also, we will have to keep an investment flow, because sustainable mobility will not be possible without a greater investment effort. So it is interesting as a first step, as a first action, but we will have to know how to distribute this funding.
Example, maybe I can bring a bit of shed some light on what may happen, hopefully, in Italy, my home country. So the new funding made available, not just through the recovery fund, but also Next Generation, is really an injection of hope, I think, for sustainable mobility in a country where it's very much car-centered. There's a lot of capacity and competitiveness in the car and automotive industry, but lately there's a new hope among the sustainable mobility advocacy groups, but also the new operators, the new entrepreneurs proposing sustainable mobility through this funding, which will help some public governments to develop plans, strategies, making mandatory the adoption of sustainable urban mobility plans. So, European Commission has put a big push in terms of funding, capacity building, guidance on how to develop a plan. And then projects, really implementing locally at the regional scale as well the infrastructure for sustainable mobility. We mentioned infrastructure before. We said it's about prioritizing. We keep saying pedestrians and cyclists first, but when we go out, and maybe, and I hope not in Bilbao, it's not the cyclists that you see first, and cycling conditions are often unsafe. So we say, let's prioritize the cyclists, but the infrastructure is unsafe. So this type of new initiatives, funding and schemes are trying really to walk the talk. If walking and cycling the active modes are to be prioritized in cities, these are the instruments that they may bring the necessary funding to the local and regional authorities to bring that infrastructure, to place the safe infrastructure which is needed for already big number of people who are moving sustainably. But also boosting public transport, and there's a lot of innovation that can still happen in public transport. We mentioned electrification, bringing hydrogen as well to the public transport system. And when looking at logistics, this is another field very important that we have seen exploding during COVID with e-commerce and suddenly just-in-time deliveries at your doorstep. So all type of car share, bike share, fleets used by companies to deliver food at your door, shoes, clothes at your door because shops were closed. So I think this program will look, taking stock at the lessons also learned during the COVID period, looking at the challenges that this decade with the climate emergency is putting on us, on our society, and it shall really be a new window of hope for having finally sustainable mobility happening for real, prioritizing all modes and the infrastructure which is needed for safe mobility, more equitable, more inclusive, and also cleaner air.
Yes, walk the talk. It's how can we evolve cities for cars and citizens to cities for citizens, no? Maybe we can put the streets downstairs, no? And you cross the cities behind the buildings, no? There are so much projects about this. What do you think about this? How is it going to affect the urban in mobility, you know? What do you think?
Okay.
Judith?
First of all, there's something that we constantly have to remember. When we are planning cities, we need to think about the majority of the population. So often we have footbridges forcing pedestrians to go up or forcing them to go down, or, we are always inconveniencing the pedestrian, and this is something that we need to be very careful about and look into when it comes to planning for transport. So if we talk about cities for people, what is the preferred mode of travel for majority of people? If people could walk, they will walk. So we need to then plan our cities in such a way that we do not inconvenience first the pedestrian, then the cyclist, so we need to have this hierarchy where we have the private car at the top. We're not eliminating the private car, of course, but we are saying that the base should be a city that walks, a city that cycles, a city that uses public transport before we go then to the level of the private car. Then we also need to remember the avoid, shift, and improve method. So we are either avoiding people traveling by private car. We're not saying do not use completely the private car, but we are saying create multiple options for people to be able to travel without thinking of the private car as their first mode. Then we're talking about shifting. This is where we have brought in the aspect of electric mobility, mobility as a service and all that. So we're talking about shifting the energy source. But the last one, just to answer this question, improve. Now we know that when we are transitioning a city towards sustainable mobility, there is a lot of investment need on that. So how then can we go around the caveat of heavy investment or heavy capital. The easiest way to do this is to improve what already exists. How do we improve what already exists? We can redesign streets. If we have a street that places an emphasis on, for instance, one mode that is not so needed in that city, then we're able to redesign that street, make it more friendly, create public spaces in that street, create opportunities to walk and cycle. In this way, then we are creating cities that are putting people at the center and also addressing the issue of heavy investment when it comes to new technology and new infrastructure. So these are some of the things that we can do when we look into the future of mobility in our cities.
Great. Would you like to add something, guys?
You mentioned improve, Judith. Improve the existing infrastructure, the existing landscape. And that's what's happening, I see, in many cities through tactical urbanism or placemaking, where the residents, the shopkeepers, the local community take ownership of what's happening in their street. And these approaches of the 15-minute city that we hear a lot over the past years, brought forward by Paris and now the city of Milano as well, and Lyon and many, many more. It's about improving what already exists. As I mentioned earlier, European cities are small, relatively small, apart from a few large metropolitan conglomerations. We have compact cities. The 15-minute city exists already, but the quality of the space, the public space, is not up to the standards of what we are expecting in terms of well-being, healthy living, active living. So over the past years, I have witnessed how London, through the Healthy Street project, is taking back the design of the street for, as you said, improving it, improving the layout, and making it more fit for the pedestrians, the cyclists, those who are more vulnerable. And not just the road design, but also bringing into the conversation, and again, the stakeholders management, the shopkeepers. We often hear that they are the first one affected by any plan of closing off car traffic because they say customers will not come. And yet there's evidence, scientific evidence proving that the wealth comes from people on foot, on bicycle. They spend maybe less one day, but they come more often. So shopkeepers are the ones who are the first to suffer, for sure, but maybe are the first one to benefit, the local economy. So somehow, this type of intervention, the 15-minute city, working on the space, what's happening on my doorstep, it's on the one hand bringing people back to street, creating street life, or live street, yes, but also supporting ground floor entrepreneurship.
Yeah, great. Pere, ¿te gustaría?
Pere, would you like to add something? Well, I think that we are now at the beginning of a change, of a transformation in urban planning. I think Bilbao is an example of a radical change, with a change of some plots of land that were abandoned and that were dramatically changed with planning, an urban planning that was based on architecture, where they would enhance singular spaces, singular buildings that enhance cities. If we would go back like 100 years, there was also an urban development plan like Barcelona. It was a closed city within the city walls with very old streets, like 150 years ago, and then the city decided to go out of the city walls with these very old and non-functional streets and spread outside the walls. So probably this new urban planning works in the management of space, and there is another component which is the management of travels. And with these two components, I think we are configuring this new work in all the cities of the world, and there is an experience that you probably already know, which is the urban planning of Singapore. Singapore is a very small country, so it is easier to carry out projects. And a country with a government which is more like the management of a country, and they will try by 2040 that each person is in a range of 45 minutes to their workplace and 25 minutes to the area where they have the shops and they buy things and also the health services. So if your longer trip is 40 minutes and this way they are carrying out a general overview of the country for 2040 that includes also this focus on health, which is related with e-mobility, cycling. So they think their priority is the health of citizens. This is a very interesting experience. Very well, I think it's very interesting. I think we have mentioned many things, PPPs, for example, also sandbox. Also, how these funds are being allocated. Also, we have discussed IoT and blockchain. And we have analyzed how urban mobility could be managed in a more smart way. I think this debate has been very interesting, so thanks a lot.
Both of you, or you three. Yeah, it's a pleasure.
And thank you to the audience.
Okay.